Hey, thanks for stopping by. My name is Brett. Welcome to On Hand Art. I've been on a quest to turn my boring backyard into a sculpture garden. So today I'm going to be using some basic metalworking techniques to turn some copper tubing and some bismuth metal into some advanced looking art. Let's get started. After measuring my leftover copper tubing, I sketched out a few options and landed on a simpler piece that will complement the space that it will go in. Using my sketch as a map, I'm gently bending the tubing. Now each of these pieces has a simple curve, so I don't need a special bending tool or anything, but each of these pieces is also a different softness, so the light colored copper is softer than the darker stuff, which just meant I had to use more leverage when bending the darker stuff. And then I also ended up using my little tubing cutter to shorten a piece, but you can also try tin snips, and I'll show you how to do that later. But with all these pieces bent, I'm holding them in place with a bunch of painter's tape and a couple of clamps. Then I'm soldering them together at the bottom using the last of my plumbing solder. I'll leave a link to the last video where I show you how to use solder like this, but I'm actually going to have to move on to using electrical solder, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But no matter what kind of solder you use, make sure you have metal under the workpiece to protect the surface, and have plenty of fresh air flowing through the area, and you'll see why in a minute. Now I can move on to sizing the bismuth discs. There will be a couple of these large ones, then a few medium and small ones. These templates will help me when I form the pans that I made from heavy-duty aluminum foil. And you really don't need much more than a single sheet of kitchen foil for this. I crumpled the sides around the templates, keeping the bottom smooth, and then just making sure to crush the sides nice and flat. I really like these round shapes, but what would you do? Leave a comment and let us all know. I'm melting the bismuth on my camping stove on high. Now I really like working with bismuth because it's non-toxic, it's easy to melt, and it forms these beautiful colors and crystals. And after about 10 minutes it's ready to pour. I ended up pouring the big ones a little thicker than I originally wanted, but there was plenty to pour off into the medium pans. And then I ended up not needing the third disc, so I remelted it and made the smaller discs from it. The trick is to keep the pans moving so that you get more colors and fewer crystals. But if you do want more crystals, let it cool just a little bit longer and then pour off the excess. It takes practice, so no two of these are the same, and you'll just get the hang of it over time. As far as safety, treat this like you're working with hot oil. It's at about 500 degrees Fahrenheit, so just keep that in mind. I only have one heat-resistant work glove on for reasons, but you might want to have two. Also, make sure you have those pans formed and ready to go before you start, that you're working on a surface you don't care about. This is my workbench. I don't really care about it that much. And if you do spill, do not panic. Let it go, let it do its thing. It's actually going to cool and solidify relatively quickly. You can just peel it up and remelt it. And then also, if you do make a mistake or you don't like the results that you get, remelt it and try again. To attach the discs to the tubing, I made these tabs by cutting down one side of the leftover tubing and then flattening it. You can use a Dremel and cutoff wheels, but I really don't feel like getting that out, so I'm going to use my tin snips. And then I grabbed my flat pliers to open it just enough to be able to press them all flat. And then I ruined my herring by hammering it flat without using herring protections. So please use herring protection, you'll thank me later. Since I'm out of plumbing solder, I got out my 20-year-old electronic solder. The difference here is really that this solder melts at a lower temperature, and it actually has the resin already in the core. Plumbing solder needs a separate solder paste, which is the resin. The downside is that most likely this stuff has lead in it, and it's also not intended to be used in the amounts I'm using. So great ventilation is an absolute must, and I actually have a lot of air flowing past me and out the garage. What I'm doing here, though, is getting a long enough length of solder to wad up in kind of a stick. And then I heat up the area I want the solder to flow to, and then I wait for it to melt. Once it's melted, the trick is to not move the work pieces until the solder goes from a shiny to dull finish. All that smoke that you're seeing here is the resin core burning, which is fine in small amounts when you're soldering a circuit board, for example. But in this case, I have, like I said, a ton of air flowing away from me and out the garage. Now I can attach the bismuth discs with construction adhesive. And then I'll leave that to set up overnight because I've learned that patience is key, especially when it comes to the strength of the construction adhesive. I made this piece in about 2 hours over a few days as I found time. So I hope that you see that you can do some really advanced things, but you don't need a lot of time or budget or even experience. And if you do have questions, leave them in the comments and I'll do my best to answer them. And if you enjoyed this video, please let me know by hitting the like button and subscribing. Not only would it mean a lot to me, but I'd also love to have you as part of the on-hand art community. But thanks for watching, and remember, you are creative.